Tonight, on The Good, the Bad, and the Unknown, Andy Kaufman has breakfast, has beeps, and then has even more breakfast. Roll the intro. Hello, boys and girls. This is your old friend RJ City, and I'm back with another episode of The Good, the Bad, and the Unknown, where I take an artist and find one work of theirs that I like, one that I don't, and one that maybe not a lot of people know about. And today we are talking about someone who, the more you learn about them, the less you really know, Andy Kaufman. He was born Andrew Jeffrey Kaufman in 1949 on Long Island. And he was not your typical child, performing at other kids' birthday parties at the age of 9. He studied television production and then started performing stand-up in coffee houses and comedy clubs on the East Coast. But he first gained popularity with his Foreign Man character, doing things like singing the Mighty Mouse theme and impressions of Elvis, and he was of course featured on The Tonight Show and the first season of SNL. And of course, his exploits into the world of professional wrestling gave him a legendary feud with Jerry the King Lawler and one of the craziest Letterman appearances of all time. And on the heels of his wrestling career, my pick for the good is the 1983 film My Breakfast with Blassie. But first, Andy always dreamed of wrestling. He used to always hang out at Madison Square Garden during WWF shows and first pitched his involvement in wrestling to Vince McMahon Sr., who didn't really want to mix the worlds of show business and wrestling. But it was there that he first became friends with legendary wrestler, manager, and kitsch pop culture icon, Classy Freddie Blassie. Fast forward to years later, Andy has already done all the stuff with Jerry Lawler in Memphis and is for the most part done with wrestling. Well, this movie came out called My Dinner with Andre, starring Andre Gregory and Wallace Shawn, who you will obviously know from The Princess Bride. It was a low-key, dry, experimental comedy, and as the title indicates, the majority of the film is just a dinner conversation. Nevertheless, it became a very influential film in terms of that reality-based style. Now, there was this weird man named Johnny Legend who actually produced Classy Freddie Blassie's album, Pencil Neck Geek. He and his partner Linda Lautrec wanted to parody My Dinner with Andre with Freddie Blassie. Originally, the film was supposed to star Freddie Blassie and rockabilly singer Ray Campy, but Freddie suggested Andy, and then they all collaborated on the premise together. My Breakfast with Blassie was filmed in a single day over 4.5 hours, and even though there's clearly a scripted outline, the film is largely improvised. It's basically an hour-long breakfast conversation between Freddie and Andy as they interact with people at the restaurant. Andy's still wearing his neck brace from the Jerry Lawler feud. The waitress at that restaurant was an actual waitress at that restaurant. However, the gross fan they encounter is actually a plant named Bob Zmuda, who's Andy's writing partner and right-hand man, and we'll talk about him a little later. Also appearing is Johnny Legend's sister, Lynn Margulies, who ended up dating Andy. She's portrayed in Man on the Moon by Courtney Love, and the first time Lynn and Andy met was actually on camera in this film. Unfortunately, this is one of Andy's final works, and his last public appearance would be at the premiere of this film. It is a very weird movie, obviously, but it's also a very funny movie, and if you've never seen it, you should watch it, and if you've seen it a long time ago, I think it deserves another look. So if you like Andy, Freddie, or My Dinner with Andre, this is probably the movie for you. So the good was My Breakfast with Blassie, and the bad, well, it also requires a little backstory. As you may know, Andy also used to perform as his alter ego, Tony Clifton, a bloated, mustachioed lounge singer who was belligerent, talentless, and incredibly unfunny, which was kind of the entire joke. Andy would often insist that Tony Clifton was a real person, and sometimes Bob Zmuda would play Tony and appear with Andy just to throw people off. Andy got Tony to appear on a bunch of talk shows, a Miss Piggy variety special, and even an episode of Taxi. However, Andy's grand idea was to make a Tony Clifton biopic. Andy and Bob wrote the screenplay together, and you can actually read it online. Bizarrely, the script has Tony Clifton dying of cancer at Cedars-Sinai, and 5 years later, that's exactly what would happen to Andy Kaufman. Universal did want to make it, but since Andy didn't have that much movie experience, they wanted to test him out in another film first. Which is why my bad is 1981's Heartbeeps. It stars Andy Kaufman, Bernadette Peters, Randy Quaid, Christopher Guest, and has music by John Williams. So what's wrong with it? Well, the entire movie. Here's the premise. Sometime in the future, where humans make a shitload of AI robots, Andy and Bernadette Peters are two robots who meet at the factory they were created at, fall in love, and decide to escape. They build a sun robot, and a police robot is trying to catch them, so they're on the robot run, and that's the entire film. It's basically like a shittier WALL-E. The makeup was nominated for an Academy Award, and it is great, but it's also one of the major problems of the film. Andy and Bernadette are covered in head to toe in plastic and metal, and they look so much like robots that it's impossible to get a genuine performance out of them. Taking Andy and constricting him like that is really just a recipe for disaster and boredom. The movie was a critical and commercial bomb, and the Tony Clifton movie was never made because Heartbeeps was so bad. So the good was My Breakfast with Blassie, the bad is Heartbeeps, and the unknown is unknown because no one has really seen the whole thing. It is the 1979 appearance of Tony Clifton on the Dinah Shore show called Dinah. Andy had appeared on Dinah a couple years before this as his foreign man character, but this was the first shot for Tony. Also in the segment with Dinah is guest co-host Charles fucking Nelson Riley. It's pretty obvious that Andy is playing Tony because bizarrely he's not wearing Tony's trademark sunglasses. Bob Zmuda later said Andy was drunk and just forgot them. Tony comes out, horribly sings On the Street Where You Live, and then is supposed to do a cooking segment making bacon and eggs with Charles and Dinah. However, Tony begins complaining that he wants to do a duet with Dinah, who says she can't because she has a cold. Tony insists that they do it, pulls out lyrics, and the duo does a terribly awkward rendition of Anything You Can Do, I Can Do Better. And then the tape abruptly ends, because what happens after that, no one has ever seen. Allegedly, Tony tries to cook, but then he starts flicking water at Dinah and forces eggshells into her hands, and then starts calling audience members up onto the set, at which point the full tape is stopped and Tony is escorted out by security. Andy's management later made Andy call Dinah to apologize. She knew it was all an act and said that he was welcome back on the show anytime, as Andy. However, the rumors around this lost tape would get even bigger when Bob Zmuda dressed up as Tony Clifton and appeared on Letterman and claimed that he actually poured a bowl of eggs onto Dinah Shore's head. As with almost everything Andy did, no one is really quite sure exactly what the fucking deal really is. Well, at least until Andy comes back. So the good was My Breakfast with Blassie, the bad was Heartbeeps, and the unknown, which we still don't know, is Tony Clifton's appearance on Dinah Shore. I am RJ City, and this is what I've chosen to do with my life.
Guests of the RJ City Show, subscribe to his channel, follow him on social media, and buy his t-shirts at ProWrestlingTees.com/RJ City.